First of all, identity is a prime mover. The purpose of education should be to enhance and strengthen our students' identities, right? That's the core thing we have to buy into in order to go through this entire project of radical pedagogy. That identity has three registers under which it is constituted and functions. Those are images, affective, and linguistic, and that the linguistic register is the most complex, right? So the identity structure then is built on a balance of these three registers, right? When they are evenly balanced in the realm of the imagist identity, the affective identity, and the linguistic register, that's what the identity structure is constructed on. And that's crucial to understand because, you know, based on this, the researchers have figured out that there are certain specific kind of human identities that emerge. And I've listed them here: the impulsive, imperial, interpersonal or systemic, institutional, and transsystemic or interindividual identities. So impulsive identity, and I'm going to go to the book for it because I think it's crucial to understand. So I'm going to kind of quote from Mark Bracher. If someone has an impulsive identity, what it means is that I am my momentary impulses. I experience any thwarting of them as threat to my very being. Okay, so that's like a momentary identity. That's who I am. That's what I express at a certain point. And if that is threatened, I will protect it at all costs. Right. The other interpersonal, so the interpersonal identity is an identity which defines itself in relation to others, right? And if my relationship with others is stable and good, then I feel good. But if it is threatened, I will try to defend it at all costs. Imperial identity basically is that I am my relationship in my current ongoing need, intention, or project, and I'm able to sacrifice my impulses, which I now have, for the purpose of enacting my need, intention, or project. Okay, so imperial is slightly beyond impulsive, but it still expresses itself in terms of my needs, right? Systemic or institutional identity is that I become the system in which I exist, right? My identity is deeply connected to my belief in that system. Think of anyone that you know, someone who works for police, someone who works in the Pakistan Army or United States Marine Corps. Those identities sometimes are deeply institutional. By that is that your identity is so deeply connected to the identity of the institution that if the institution is criticized, your identity comes to crisis. Similarly, identities of faith institutions, right? For example, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Jew, I'm a Christian. And so then when those faiths, those structures within which that identity is formed and is connected to, when they are challenged, right? That identity comes into crisis. And then transsystemic or interindividual identities. In this case, Bracher says that I'm like Walt Whitman, a self that contains multitudes. When I operate in the interindividual mode, I care about all other individuals, no matter what their group or interpersonal identity is. So this is probably the most complex identity, right? Which is interpersonal and transsystemic, which means that a person inhabiting this identity is not governed by his or her impulses, does not have an imperial identity, does not rely on a relationship with another person to define that identity, and does not believe in one stringent system and does not have his or her identity connected to that system, so that when that system either collapses or is criticized, the identity comes in. So this is a person who can function in more than one systems, right? And express that identity in them, but also who's also grounded in a kind of identity that is interindividual, where he or she can incorporate other people's ideas or talk to them and does not necessarily judge everything with the systemic identity that he or she might have, right? Now, in a way, then, as teachers, having understood how identity is structured roughly, I mean, you'll have to read the book for a more careful understanding of it. Now, one thing that comes across really clear to us is that as we walk into our classroom, right, our students, they're not blank slates. I mean, if you've seen or watched my lecture on critical pedagogy, we already know that the students are not empty vessels who receive our knowledge. But when we walk into a classroom, let's say a literature classroom, knowing that all these students sitting there are in a certain state of anxiety. Now, we might think that they are in a state of anxiety because they're worried about their grades or how they will do. Yes, those are part of it. But the biggest anxiety is that they are at a new place, in a new course, in front of a new professor, and their identities are under stress. Because remember, as I said in the beginning, and Bracher suggests through his research, that it's our identity, social identities, needs that motivate our actions. So these students are already anxious. Their identities, are under stress. And now as a professor, when I look at that class, what I have to keep in mind is that these are diverse people. They can have different grades of identities. How do I teach literature that, first of all, encourages them on an unconscious level, maybe, that they are okay, so that that anxiety level drops, right? And two, how do I tailor my education so that at the end of that class, their sense of self is further strengthened? Because the idea is that the problems in the world happen because of insecure identities, right? So the purpose of education then, as mentioned in the very beginning, is to help our students enhance and strengthen their identities. So how do we strengthen them? Not necessarily by telling them whatever they believe is right or by saying whatever they believe is wrong, but by enhancing their identity traits, by balancing them so they can incorporate more difference. They can think beyond the systems. They can think beyond their master narratives. So keeping that in mind, we will have to then deliver a certain specific kind of pedagogy.